my name is Courtney Howard and I did my TED Talk presentation on The Great Gatsby using the psychoanalytical lens. Psychoanalytical literary criticism is a type of criticism that views text from a psychological standpoint. This lens helps us view the text as an expression of the personality, state of mind, feelings, and conscious and unconscious desires of its author. I like this lens because it offers the reader a different perspective on the text, such as the motivation onto why the author wrote it, and the different symbols he included inside the novel. For those of you that haven't read The Great Gatsby, here's a quick summary. The novel is narrated by Nick Carraway and follows Jay Gatsby, a man who orders his life around one desire, to be reunited with Daisy Buchanan, the love he lost 5 years earlier. Long story short, Gatsby's quest led him from poverty to wealth, into the arms of his beloved, and eventually to death. Published in 1925, The Great Gatsby is a classic piece of American fiction. It is a novel of triumph and tragedy, and it is usually noted for the remarkable way Fitzgerald captured a cross-section of American society. Today I will be discussing the background of F. Scott Fitzgerald's life, how they impacted his writing styles, and how his life was mirrored throughout the novel, as well as the perspective of the American dream and money in The Great Gatsby. Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald was born in St. Paul, Minnesota. The Fitzgerald lived just blocks from the city's most elegant and wealthy families, but they were not considered rich and therefore were somewhat low on the community's social hierarchy. It seems as though a lot of Fitzgerald's interest in societal life began in his youth in Minnesota, when he would play and associate with the rich kids in the neighborhood, but always knew that he was never entirely a part of their society. He attended prep school and dancing classes and later went on to study at Princeton. Fitzgerald began to write small literary pieces in high school and then continued writing into his later college years until he was rejected by a publisher. He later fell in love with a girl named Minerva King, who became his inspiration for Daisy Buchanan in The Great Gatsby. The two dated until she called off the relationship because she didn't think he'd be able to provide for her. He then fell in love with a girl named Zelda Sayre. Zelda, being the youngest daughter of an Alabama Supreme Court judge, refused marriage until Scott could sport her in the manner to which she was accustomed to. After being discharged from the Army in February 1919, Fitzgerald moved to New York and took up work with an advertising agency, hoping to earn enough money so he and Zelda could get married. By June of 1919, Zelda had tired of waiting for Scott to earn his fortune and broke their engagement. After his big break with publishing The Romantic Egotist in 1920, Zelda agreed to marry him that next week. The couple was immediately pushed into the limelight because of Fitzgerald's sudden success, and the two began living the lavish lifestyle of those in the Roaring Twenties. Despite their success, the couple's at-home life was plagued with hardships. The two went through periods of heavy alcohol consumption, and although Fitzgerald wrote sober, he drank more and more frequently and excessively. Drinking was also a factor in the Fitzgeralds' frequent fights. As stated by Richard Lehan in his criticism, The Great Gatsby, the text as construct, narrative knots, and narrative unfolding, Scott's drinking earned him the reputation as an irresponsible writer, which kept him from being taken seriously by the literary community. The Fitzgeralds' marriage was also plagued by financial difficulties, and then, in 1930, Zelda had a mental breakdown that put her in and out of the hospital 4 times. This put a huge strain on their marriage and pushed Scott to have an affair with a woman named Sheila Graham until he died in 1940. In The Great Gatsby, the background of the narrator, Nick Carraway, parallels the real-life Fitzgerald in many ways. Carraway and Fitzgerald were Minnesota-bred sons of well-to-do families, Ivy League-educated Midwesterners who ventured east after World War I for opportunities in the bond business and writing, respectively. Carraway opens his narration of The Great Gatsby with the advice that his father had imparted to him. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. Likewise, Fitzgerald was reared with the notions of honor and humility. In his biography and criticisms of Fitzgerald, D.N. Cedars explains that Fitzgerald's father taught him the code of the Southern gentleman, the belief in good manners and right instincts. Cedars recounts times of Fitzgerald's sympathetic nature towards his friends and colleagues. Quote, Fitzgerald always saw what others were feeling and sympathized with them, especially if he himself had imposed on them. End quote. In The Great Gatsby, the tragic account of the main character, Jay Gatsby, also reflects the personal experiences of author F. Scott Fitzgerald. Gatsby and Fitzgerald were romantics who embarked on love affairs during military service, made new money early in life, and hosted wild parties to impress the women they loved. Gatsby and Fitzgerald succumbed to the decadent lifestyle and eventually lost themselves in the affection they had for Daisy Buchanan and Zelda Sayre. Ironically, Gatsby and Fitzgerald both led far-fetched lives that ended in tragic deaths. When Fitzgerald's writing career began to flourish, he began showing off his money in seemingly tasteless ways. Cedars also says, Fitzgerald saw his own rise from poverty to affluence as an illustration of the terrible, meaningless power of money. Fitzgerald had his own longings for the past. Focused on their happier days together, Fitzgerald struck with the hope that Zelda would recover from her mental illness. After battling with bad press, drinking spells, and deteriorating health, Fitzgerald died of a heart attack in Hollywood. Quote, he was buried with a flurry of ironies even thicker than he himself dared to devise for Gatsby, end quote, Cedars says. His body was laid out in an undertaker's parlor on the other side of the tracks, relative to Beverly Hills. Quote, he was not placed in the chapel, but in a back room, and like Gatsby's funeral in the novel, almost no one came to see him. This correlation between reality and fiction can also be seen within Hamlet. One incident that is rumored to be closely connected was the drowning death of a woman named Catherine Hamlet in a nearby village when Shakespeare was just 15 years old. It was not clear if her death was accidental or suicide, and this seems to be the basis for Ophelia's death in the play. Of course, it becomes a matter of contention whether she intended to kill herself or not, as suicide was a serious issue in regards to Christian burials during that time period. While F. Scott Fitzgerald draws on characters of various backgrounds who interact with one another in an attempt to show the spectrum of class dynamics in America, the author also uses various settings in the novel to highlight the complexity of the American dream. While some of the scenes are set in New York City, much of the novel takes place either in East Egg or West Egg, New York. The distinction between the two towns on the North Shore of Long Island is made clear to readers early in the story. Nick Carraway, the novel's narrator, points out that his rented summer cottage is located next door to Gatsby's mansion, but is still located in less fashionable West Egg. Those with old money, such as the Buchanans, live in East Egg. This not-so-subtle reminder of class distinction underscores Gatsby's humble background and suggests the challenges of moving beyond one's origins. Regardless of Gatsby's financial success, he is still considered new money and therefore not quite up to par by the established families in the area. This resembles Fitzgerald's childhood situation. Another setting that calls the American dream into question is the Valley of Ashes. This is a desolate and abandoned strip of land that people travel through on their way to New York City. It functions to remind readers of the disparity between not only those with old and new money, but also those who enjoy a comfortable living in America and those who struggle to attain one. In Carla Verdemay's criticism, The American Dream and the Great Gatsby, she says, the Valley of Ashes juxtaposes the magnificence of Gatsby's lavish parties and the comfort of the Buchanan's lifestyle. During my TED Talk, I highlighted points on the background of F. Scott Fitzgerald and how he came to be, mirrored events between The Great Gatsby and Fitzgerald's home life, and the ongoing theme of the American dream within The Great Gatsby and how it conveyed Fitzgerald's inner motivations. I think that the psychoanalytical lens gives readers an opportunity to reconsider the American dream and whether it serves or could ever fulfill its supposed purpose. It also lets the reader investigate themes of social class and social justice throughout the viewpoint of Fitzgerald and Gatsby, who both long for the happiness of their youths.